This is episode 221 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it is summer, it is August, but things are busier than ever in terms of public policy and just all the issues facing our state and our nation.
Yes, this is the crazy season of politics, and it seems like when you just think it might slow down, it does not. It accelerates. It goes the other direction.
Yeah, it is. It just keeps getting busier and busier, and getting all the issues of the day addressed in a coherent fashion in a 45-minute podcast is a challenge nowadays. First out of the chute, though, a little humor. We're not going to play it right now, but we will give you, dear listener, a recommendation. If you get on the YouTube on your computer or your smartphone, check out Governor Knows Best. Very funny parody video for those of us with kids. We recognize the tune immediately because it is from the Disney classic Tangled, a take on Rapunzel, where the evil mother of Rapunzel talks about how much she knows and how you should be scared of the world around you. Well, Governor Knows Best is a very fun take on that song, seen through the eyes of Michelle Lujan Grisham and the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, and GOV''NOR, Knows Best. It will come right up on YouTube for the moment. We'll see. I bet YouTube takes it down within a week, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and as if to just pile on even more good news, we talked last week briefly about the declining number of COVID-19 cases in New Mexico. 7-day average, this is from the New York Times, back on July 29th. So we're just talking, 10, 15 days ago, the average was 330 new cases of COVID-19. As of the latest data published, New Mexico's 7-day average is 186 new cases. So almost half where we were before. The daily number of deaths from COVID-19, of course, other factors may apply, but we're at 4. That's generally trending downward, but there's no doubt that if the number of cases is going down dramatically, the number of deaths will eventually lag behind and go down as well. So more good news.
Yeah, it's fantastic news. And the one thing is I've looked at the COVID statistics more than I ever care to, and they're very difficult to do a common size or a apples to apples comparisons across states because so many things are different. But the one thing I will point out about New Mexico is we are not missing many cases of the COVID because our testing is so high relative to the typical state in the United States. And so when in some states, if the numbers aren't necessarily that high, it may be because they're not testing very much. That is not the case in New Mexico. So I think that lower case count is pretty reliable from what I can tell.
And as usual, like the sun follows night, day follows night, Michelle Lujan Grisham is there to take full credit for the success. As you know, Wally, we've talked about, she has been on New Mexicans' cases for not adhering to her mask mandates and various other orders. Well, here on Twitter, the data is clear, says Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor. The critical actions that New Mexico has taken to slow the spread of COVID-19 have not only been effective, they have saved lives. My thanks to every New Mexican who continues to wear a mask and avoid gathering in groups. So it's good news. I will take it. Bad news. Shame on you not listening to me and my orders. And, I think that is not uncommon among the political classes in the United States, but boy, it seems pretty transparent to me that she likes to take credit for the good news and that the bad news goes on us.
The credit goes to me and the blame goes to everyone else. So, I think it's good. We'll have to see. I have a feeling we're in this for the long run, and so there's a lot of things that have been said in this COVID that haven't necessarily played out. What's going to happen? And you know, it is certainly New Mexico. I would argue, yeah, we probably saved some COVID lives. We've certainly cost some other lives. You know, it's one of those. There is no pure and clean and straightforward way to handle something like this. Everything has a benefit and everything has a cost. And right now, just to manage the COVID, if that's what we want to do, it's the unintended consequences continue to pile up here in New Mexico with regard to the approach, and we'll have to see. And we've seen in lots of other places, they have their day. And so, have we really gotten rid of the COVID, or have we just delayed the number of cases we have further out? And we talked weeks and months ago, if there's a vaccine, this strategy may be perfect, but it's always that vaccine's right around the corner, but it's been around the corner for a few months now, and it may be around the corner for many more months and possibly even years to come.
Yeah, and it's too early to tell, I think, really which states have done things better, which states have done things worse overall in balancing the different aspects of this crisis. I mean, even if your main thrust is just to stop the spread of the virus, but economically right now the situation is so up in the air, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Trump administration and the stimulus packages and whatnot, but we're just not seeing the economic chickens come home to roost yet because of the federal bailouts that have been passed, and a lot of these issues are filtering through still the economy, and we're just not going to get a full accounting for that until the effects of those stimulus packages wear off. But we got to talk a little bit more about the COVID-19 situation. Of course, our governor seems to be a really big fan of the New Mexico United. She's talked at length about them and allowing them to play their games, and they're being cautious, but they're also a team that is bearing some level of risk and doing innovative practices, playing their games out of state in order to hopefully remain virus free. The governor's not apparently quite as big of a fan of the Aggies and Lobos, especially their football teams. And we've jokingly said, we've talked about how we could combine those teams or something and maybe have one decent college football team. Well, at this point, we may not even have a college football season anywhere in this country. As we record this, the Big Ten appears to be on the verge of, Big Ten, of course, that's Ohio State, Michigan, so some of the biggest of big boy college football programs in the entire country, of canceling their entire football seasons. And if the big boys aren't going to move forward, I remain very suspicious that the Mountain West and the Aggies and Lobos will play their season. So it's a very dynamic situation right here with regard to college football. Of course, all sports, professional and college, but I do think it's questionable the way the governor has treated one versus the other. But your comments, Wally?
Well, I read some comments from the administration. Well, that one's a professional and one is not, and we don't have enough time to talk about that. But the professional nature of Division I football, as it is,
very close to professional.
Yeah, and I would say if you were to look at it objectively, and I'm not a hater of it, but I would say they're by any objective standard, it's professional. So. Yeah. That's one of the issues that's out there. But we've talked about, and I've advocated for a long time, is about a level of high level principles that we use without having to do the specific picking of industries and putting them one in most favored nation status, i.e. The New Mexico United, and one in the doghouse, the Aggies and the Lobos.
Yeah, it does seem that it's the equivalent of the Lobo and Aggie wineries, if you will, that have been shut down for some time, versus the United being the Walmart or whatever, or the breweries or some other business that has achieved some level of favoritism with the governor. And it's worth noting that in the past legislative session, $4.1 million was allocated to the United, ostensibly for the purposes of building a new stadium for them. It's a far cry from what they're ultimately going to need in order to build a stadium.
Which is another problem is partially allocated capital
There you go.
expenditures from New Mexico that sit there and do absolutely
Right.
nothing. So
Those dollars were not removed during the special session. And as you note, Nora Myers Sackett, the governor's press secretary, said one is a business, the other is not. One is a job, and the other is not. Professional sports teams don't exist on a college campus like school teams do, or virus infection would affect a great many people beyond the team. Obviously, those are realistic things, but college is going to be very different from the old days of gathering around the keg on a Friday night and frat party and those kinds of things. It does strike me, as I know it strikes you, as you just said, as being a picking of favorites, winners and losers, those kinds of things, and it's questioning, it's questionable, I should say, in terms of what she is doing. However, news could be ahead of the governor in the sense that the Big Ten and other major sporting conferences could be eliminating this season, delaying it till the spring. The Mid-American Conference, and I'm a proud graduate of a Mid-American Conference school. That's Bowling Green State University with my undergrad. That conference has already made the decision to move their football schedule into the spring. It's very difficult, and there are aspects of the professional sports that are coming into play. For example, you have NFL prospects, people who want to earn the big bucks in the NFL. They're missing out on an entire season in order to really cash in, and it is very close to a semi-pro situation. But probably the one that's more important than the collegiate level and the professional level is Albuquerque Public Schools, the school board, and it seems like they're relatively united on this. They're not going to vote until Wednesday, so this podcast will be out, but it does appear that the school board is making rumblings about not having in-person teaching at all until the end of the 2020 calendar year. I don't know if that's going to be reaffirmed by the school board. I think it'll be a very controversial issue if they go ahead and do that. But boy, it's a real kick in the pants for a lot of parents who are hoping to finally get their kids back into some normal schedule as well as the parents' schedules.
yeah, and we've talked a lot about this. You just wonder. It's like the marginal achievers, those students that have a tough time learning as it is, to throw them into a year of online learning. And, there's lots of studies that once students fall too far behind, they can never catch up. That's one of the things about the whole big debate, which I won't go into details about social promotion, is that's one of the arguments for it, is that once certain students get too far behind. So yeah, there is a lot of risk from this education point of view.
And kind of to unite the last two issues we discussed, something we've of course talked about, and I had an Albuquerque Journal opinion piece saying that the money should follow the students. Some states are looking into that. Rand Paul, U.S. Senator from Kentucky, has put forth legislation along those lines. Aside from that, one of the options I think should be considered, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, but now it becomes even more salient with APS making this potential policy change. Why not have a scientific survey of all the parents and all the teachers and administrators at APS, get the unions out of the middle of this, because I think the unions are skewing the discussion right now, and ask them who feels comfortable going into a classroom under these parameters, social distancing, whatever it might be, and who doesn't. And then if there's an ability to make that match happen, where the people who want the in-person learning can have it and the people who don't can have the virtual, why not do something a little more creative than the one-size-fits-all policy? And I would say the same thing for collegiate sports. Yeah, there may not be unanimity among the athletes. Now, you get into with both the teachers and the athletes. I mean, the scholarship of free college tuition is essentially payment, same as teachers getting paid and administrators getting paid if they're not teaching in the classroom. Having that discussion about whether you withhold, some form of payment from people who aren't willing or able to do their job, so to speak. But that, why not have that kind of discussion about trying to get as many people in the system the result they want as possible?
Yeah, and just an extreme example: a healthy 25-year-old that really wants to be in the classroom, knows the risks, very healthy, willing to take it, could be a far different situation from somebody in their 60s or somebody at any age with quote unquote underlying conditions, whatever. There's many things with regard to high blood pressure, obesity, heart problems, and the like that make a COVID infection and the risk of it far greater price to pay if it actually comes to fruition.
No doubt about it. But I suspect that they are not going to pursue that option. Again, one size fits all approach to education just isn't the way we need to do things. Now, kind of on an aside, not an aside, but certainly not in the vein of the public school conversation or even COVID-19, you may have seen signs around our lovely state for various construction projects. This week we're talking to Carla Kugler, and we didn't get to ask her opinion on the issue, but it's kind of a redux, if you will, of the Richardson era GRIP, Governor Richardson Investment Project. Bill Richardson was not putting his own money up for highway construction projects in our state. But the Rio Grande Foundation and Power the Future, Larry Behrens' organization, we called the governor on her highway signs, and we put a little picture of one of the signs at errorsofenchantment.com. Governor Lujan Grisham Highway Improvement Project, the big orange sign, and then it talks about how much money is going in. Again, just like Bill Richardson, Governor Lujan Grisham is not putting her own personal money up to repair our roads, and yet, Wally, she gets to stick orange signs around our state, essentially nothing more than campaign signs saying, hey, look at me, I'm funding these projects. And a lot of low information voters are probably saying, golly gee, thanks, Governor, for putting up the money for these projects.
Yeah, the first time I ever really encountered this was when you go to Chicago. The Chicago mayors are always very good at putting their name all over everything. And that was something that in Albuquerque we didn't see very much of until Martin Chavez. He figured that out. And so you'd see the Martin Chavez right above the golf course sign at Ladera. And it's like, what's that about? Well, this is that same sort of thing. And yeah, it's just basically taxpayer-funded largesse, and it's not unprecedented, but it's not necessarily been that popular a thing here in New Mexico. But
it's pretty popular.
Well, it's getting there.
The Cheryl Williams Stapleton African American Pavilion at the fairgrounds is one, and you're right. Marty Chavez was a notorious self-promoter with some of those things.
Well, we had the Manny Aragon Torreon until Manny Aragon went to the real Torreon, the jail, and they had to take his name off of it. So yeah, there's things there, and I'm all for naming things after people as soon as they're not in office anymore.
Preferably dead.
Preferably dead, exactly.
Yes.
And we're not talking about the early death. Just when it happens, then that's a nice way to honor them.
Yeah.
In the meantime, what is it? As you say, I think it's basically taxpayer-funded campaign contribution.
Exactly. So I don't know that she will do anything or that the pressure will be brought to bear. I will say that back when it was GRIP and the government Richardson investment project, I many moons ago was passing on the bike path by Paseo del Norte, which is also where the Rail Runner station is. And I snapped a picture of the sign on my film camera not the iPhone, nothing close to that, not even the BlackBerry, and put it up on the blog. It's been lost to the sands of time. Trust me, I did a yeoman's work to try to find these photos, but we did alert the local news and did a story, and sure enough, the folks in charge of the rail runner came along and changed those signs to make sure that they did not say, basically, Bill Richardson did this. That was,
back when political shame still existed, evidently,
even
right?
even Bill Richardson. Yeah, I know, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So we'll see if Michelle Lujan Grisham is able to be shamed in terms of these construction project signs bearing her name. Now, Wally, kind of moving back into more COVID-related news, but we have been talking at length about the federal government stimulus plans that have kind of they've kept a lot of these governors who have been locking down their states going, and the economies of those states have been able to persevere despite large amounts of the economies being shut down, or in the case of oil and gas, prices being weighed down. Well, I don't even know that this is legal, and we're going to find out. But with Washington Congress specifically, unable to come to an agreement on a next generation stimulus package, President Trump stepped into the breach and issued an executive order. A couple parts of this whole thing: he extended unemployment benefits. Instead of the extra $600, folks are going to be able to get an extra $400. Some are questioning. $300 of that comes from the federal government, $100 from the states. So
no, paying? No, we don't want to pay.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, does Washington have the ability to take state funds and put them up as part of this whole situation? There's the disaster relief fund, which is also going to be used to pay these bills. It's $44 million. It won't be enough to keep these unemployment benefits going through the end of the year. Deferring payroll taxes. So
something that was done during the economic downturn of over a decade ago, reducing those. Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
making Social Security that much more at risk,
and Medicare.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Now there's other aspects. He's essentially jawboning lenders in terms of college loans, which I think he's hoping maybe will shake loose some younger votes, essentially saying, no, we're not going to require student loans to be paid through the end of the year. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is one of the organizations that really watches these things, these packages, these various changes cost about $13 billion in additional debt, which
is paltry compared to the couple trillion that's been spent to this point, right?
To kind of turn Everett Dirksen's phrase on its head, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, you're talking real money. Well, when you've been talking about $2 and $3 trillion packages, $13 billion is essentially a drop in the bucket. But the point is this a legal thing, and does this set up future presidents to also do further executive orders that might not be entirely legal? And we know Obama's pen and phone. Trump has spent a lot of his time in the White House overturning Obama's pen and phone. But the politics of this thing, I think Trump's looking at this saying, well, we're about to hit November. I do want to do something on the unemployment thing because people aren't necessarily going to blame their governor. They're going to blame me. And I want to be able to show them I'm doing something. Now, does he successfully flip the issue and get the Democrats saying, oh, you can't do this. We're going to sue you. We're going to try to block these things. So kind of a double thing. Is this the right policy move? And is this the right political move?
Yeah, and the answer to that is who knows? I do think the calculus is that unless you just get a hyper aggressive federal judge, by the time they decide whether this is legal or illegal.
It's not the New Mexico Supreme Court, Wally.
It is not. No, I agree. Well, yes. A lot of these things, though, by the time they're resolved, it's like the political season's there. And we're in August. So the thing about August is September, October, and November, and then the elections will be done. And for better or for worse, there'll be a whole different calculus.
And that's what I'm referring to, of course, not the ideology,
Oh,
but
no,
the
I
speed of
understand.
action. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that we've seen federally is that the power of the executive branch has continued to grow over the past, 20, 30 years, with the legislative branch basically punting towards that. A lot of it has to do with lack of bipartisan view in Washington with regard to whichever president's in there. But presidents have in the past 2 or 3 done a lot more than the presidents before them in terms of making things happen without legislation from Congress.
Yeah, and it's those are a couple of tricky questions. Obviously, from a fiscal perspective, $13 billion is a lot better than the Democratic plan that passed the House was $3.1 trillion, the HEROES Act. Yeah. So if we can continue to battle COVID, open economies, see improvements in unemployment rates, and see the economy open up and put more people back to work, that definitely, kind of would go towards favoring this kind of policy. But if this is just a stopgap on the way to Biden and a future Democrat Congress passing another massive bill, or Trump
to bail out states and cities that have not really done a whole lot to manage their spending,
or Trump caving in, then it's not something that we're going to look very fondly upon. So I would say yes, definitely TBD on the success or failure of this, but it's really going to hinge on how we get the economy rolling again. And Trump could have never gotten such a modest package through the Democrat-controlled House, probably not even the Republican-controlled Senate. They, when push comes to shove, are probably looking for more money for their states.
Yeah.
So, speaking of more money for government, Albuquerque's parking attendants have been working very hard. We always applaud, I'm being sarcastic, hardworking government employees, because the only thing worse than a lazy government worker is a hardworking government worker. And in this case, those parking enforcement folks have been writing a boatload of tickets to already struggling businesses and their customers who are being told, you should shop online, you should shop online. And now in Nob Hill, along Central, these small businesses, they're desperately trying to hang on after the ART fiasco and everything else. The ticket writing folks there at the city have been just going crazy. According to data from the city in a journal editorial, the city issued 33,321 parking citations in fiscal year 2020. So that's which ended in July, July 1 or June 30th. Yeah. That is a whopping 35% increase from the previous year, 74% from 2 years ago. And none of the enforcement officers were even working in April or May of this year due to the pandemic. So they essentially blew last year out of the water by 35%, working only 10 of the 12 months, and the previous year by 74%, of course, also 10 out of the 12 months. And where are the parking meters at in this town? They are predominantly along Central and Nob Hill or in downtown Albuquerque.
In front of small businesses.
Yeah. Wally, this strikes me as yet another attempt by government to kill any small business that rears its ugly head in the city of Albuquerque.
Yeah, small businesses have certainly faced an uphill battle. And to be perfectly clear, none of these are, I won't say none, there are some that are open without licenses that have violated COVID safe practices here in New Mexico. But these businesses that are along Central, they're open. They're operating according to the percentages of people that are allowed in them. And then to be basically writing tons of tickets on those in front of those businesses is pretty suspect. The other thing you could think is, well, maybe that 2 years ago, maybe we had way too many parking ticket writers that we could do with a quarter of them. If a quarter of them, if they're working this hard, maybe they weren't working very hard a couple of years ago. They were just driving around in their cool little parking enforcement trikes, and those cool little carts that are kind of like an ice cream cart without the ice cream. Maybe they've gone from not working hard enough to maybe working too hard. So
Yeah, and there is a free market argument for parking enforcement, which is that, well, these are precious, limited spaces, and businesses want to see a high turnover among people parking in front of their stores and shops.
And you
So,
don't want somebody with an office using a
right.
retail parking meter spot for, days, weeks, months, and that can happen without some sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made.
Now, I can't speak for Nob Hill businesses, but I can speak for downtown, which is a healthy percentage of your parking meters in
Yes.
this city. Very few people are parking on Albuquerque streets. I don't think it's because they are afraid of the ticket enforcers. I think it's because nobody's going downtown. And I question the number of folks going to shop at Nob Hill, given the COVID-19 situation, given the economy, given that they're being told to stay home. It strikes me as this is just insult to injury that our local government is piling on these businesses. So it's really troubling to me that we're seeing this kind of thing. And not to take it in too extreme of a fashion, but there is a talk of social justice and police reforms and whatnot. And Ferguson, Missouri, one of the places that had riots and had a seriously problematic shooting of by a police officer. One of the things that had really driven the locals nuts about the cops in that area was that the police were used as a fundraising arm for city government. And we're not at that point here yet, but I don't really want to get the city of Albuquerque into the mindset of they should rely upon people like ticket writers and police officers for a healthy percentage of the city budget. This is not what these guys are supposed to be doing down there.
Yeah, the city of Albuquerque just through the courts has been forced off of their civil asset forfeiture addiction that they had, which was basically the policing for profit thing. And then, the whole thing about that profit motive. There's certain places, and Arizona is pretty bad for this. I will say that is a speed trap city where you're over the speed limit 3 miles per hour, but that's still a $75 or whatever fine. And there was a lot of frustration when the city of Albuquerque went to its red light cameras, particularly since the yellow lights were set such that there were more red light fines. So there is a history of bad things with regard to this, and I'm not ready to call this in the same category as civil asset forfeiture or bad policy with regard to the red light cameras, but it certainly bears some watching. Something's not quite right here, and if they can write this many tickets, maybe we can redeploy some of those assets elsewhere and still do a good job of not having people parking for 8 or 12 hours there on Central.
Yeah, and speaking of good old local governments here in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, we have a couple of pieces of legislation that are being introduced. One, we talked to at some length with Carla Kugler of the Associated Business and Builders and Contractors, their chapter here in New Mexico. Bernalillo County, the commission is introducing an ordinance to Debbie O'Malley and the new guy Collins, I think is his name, Colley, to institute project labor agreements in local construction. Basically, this is handing over responsibility for a local public works project to the unions. It's a very easy way for politicians to dramatically empower the trade unions and supply them more money, more resources, force workers to essentially join those unions in order to work on a variety of public works projects. This legislation, this ordinance, has been introduced as of Tuesday's meeting of the county commission. Now it's just introduced, but we're hoping that we can get people to contact their county commissioners and say, no, this is not a good idea. I know that Carla's organization is going to be involved as well. This is just beginning, but folks, beware that this is just the latest union-friendly union giveaway that government is trying. And of course, if it happens at the county, chances are it'll go to the city as well at some point. Also, yet another discussion of paid sick leave at the city of Albuquerque. Councilor Diane Gibson has introduced a ordinance for a task force to explore options for implementing minimum sick leave requirements in the city, R86. You can contact your city councilor in Albuquerque and tell them that that is not a good idea. We have had this discussion about mandatory paid sick leave again and again and again. And the economy, the business situation is no better than it was a month or two ago when it was rejected. We need to get beyond this whole idea of government mandated employment policies and move towards, if you're going to encourage sick leave, give businesses a tax credit, give them some kind of assistance in offering this to their employees.
Yes, it's amazing, these policies. The city of Albuquerque voted down mandatory paid sick leave in a onerous form a few years ago when the economy was doing, by all objective measures, much better than it is today. The other thing that is good to point out is that the federal government has a COVID stopgap, so that exists already. So that's already in what the feds is doing. So it's not like anyone has to come to work if they have the COVID. So. But we have a lot of these small businesses that they're barely hanging on with their PPP loans, trying to get a few people in their businesses, whether it be retail, restaurants, or many other industries like that, service industries that are struggling. And to add this on them will just bring more bankruptcy. And, I think like everything in life, there's a benefit and there's a cost. And there's certainly a benefit to have a mandatory sick leave, but the cost is probably a lot higher than that benefit, at least for now here in Albuquerque and New Mexico.
Yeah, and of course, to reiterate, the businesses that are least likely to offer paid sick leave are also the ones that have been most devastated in this entire situation. Folks and I'm not saying I know anything about their sick leave policies, but I'm inclined to think that Cliff's Amusement Park, Main Event, Hinkle Family Fun Center, places which remain closed.
Yeah, what do they have in common? They're closed.
Yeah, they're all closed and have been since the outset of this whole situation. You're going to start imposing new policies on them, new expensive policies for them to give to their workers. You're going to drive more and more of these kinds of things. These are the businesses that are serving our children, serving as outlets for fun and excitement in our community at a time when so many avenues are closed off. Now, those businesses are closed off now, but at some point, hopefully, they're able to get going again. And making them all pay mandated sick leave is not a good path to getting them reopened. Of course, restaurants, especially the small, mom and pop restaurants, those are going to be challenged, and these are the same people who are having to buy tents or rent tents and put them up and have some limited way to serve their customers if they're not shut down. And there are plenty of restaurants that still have been shut down. And just any other small business that's being impacted right now, chances are those are the kinds of businesses that are having to if you enact paid sick leave, that they're going to be the ones facing a majority of the challenges. So it is a messed up policy in the best of times, but especially right now where you have so many of these businesses closed or really struggling just to keep their heads above water.
Yeah, not to get too far into the weeds with regards to the detail, but the types of businesses you described are the same ones that a lot of those have flexible part-time and temporary work and other things that make even the value of sick leave to their employees not as valuable as somebody who's in a career-oriented full-time job. Although there's exceptions to that. But again, that's been the theme that's come up now 3 times is we're good here in New Mexico at doing a one-size-fits-all. The same program applies to very disparate either geographies, different types of businesses, or whatever, and you get pretty predictable results. It hurts a lot of people, a lot of the businesses, without doing the benefits that quote unquote the policy is designed to enable when you do it that way.
And the final topic for this afternoon, we made our way through Wally, but could New Mexico's legislature have an extraordinary session to deal with the COVID-19 and the governor's use and abuse, I would say, of political power under the various laws? We've obviously seen a lot of groups target the courts unsuccessfully. The courts have been very pliable for the governor. An extraordinary session would allow for 3/5 of the legislators in the House and Senate to call a legislative session without the permission of the governor or the Speaker of the House. That would mean that they can do it and set their own agenda. Now, I don't know that this is going to happen. I suspect that the Democrats are pretty firm in lockstep with the governor, but we still have a John Arthur Smith. We have a Clemente Sanchez. We have some of these moderate Democrats. Maybe not enough of them will go, but at least it's worth trying to encourage some of these folks, especially on their way out the door, to float the idea, build some pressure, because there's definitely a need to pressure the governor to move in the right direction. But there's even a website set up, nmextraordinarysession.com, EXTRA ordinarysession.com, nmextraordinarysession.com. There's also a post over at Errors of Enchantment. I encourage you to get in touch with your legislators. The legislature's just been totally out of the loop on so much of what the governor's doing, and something needs to be done to put some pressure on her.
Yeah, and it's one of those like these public health orders. New Mexico has the equivalent of a nearly evergreen approach to these. There's some states that their legislative body needs to acquiesce or approve what their governors are doing on a more frequent basis. Those are some of the things. I certainly heard a lot of frustration from legislators on both sides of the aisle with regard to the governor kind of undoing some of their appropriations work that they did in the special session. So not to put it too fine a point on it, but I don't think hell's ready to freeze over and that there will be a extraordinary session. But I do believe that a lot of the issues that some people are calling for will be dealt with and addressed, if not passed, in the regular 60-day session, because there is some frustration. And just as we talked about a little earlier in the podcast about the executive branch of the presidency having a lot more power than it used to, because the legislature in the U.S. Congress just basically is asleep in the wheel and wouldn't act. I'm not so sure that the legislature will be as passive here in New Mexico. And an old legislator told me something, and I won't even say what party he's a member of, but I don't think it matters, is he said that, yeah, governors think they're going to be around forever, but the most they're here is 8 years, and we're here a lot longer than that. And so I think that concept and mindset may come to the surface a little bit more in the January regular session of the legislature.
Yeah, there's a guaranteed way for the voters out there who are concerned is to get out and vote and make sure that legislators who aren't going to kowtow to the governor get elected. I do think that there will be at least some awakening of the legislature after the election, because the Democrats in power don't want to make the governor look bad right now before an election. They don't want to stick their necks out and do something that might cause controversy. But there is a certain amount of institutional pride that we haven't seen in Washington, D.C. in recent years that does exist in the legislature. And maybe we'll see some kind of rebuke or public action in the legislative body. But only time will tell, and we are out of time. So thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.